Hello everyone, this is part 4 of What If Naruto Escapes Konoha to Rebuild His Life, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. What's so funny, exactly? The boy asked. Temari tried to control herself. In our village, giggle, there's always been the legend that wind masters could ignite the air. I always thought, snicker, that it was because their fans were painted to look like it. She started to laugh again and held up her fan for him to see. On the inside of the frame were carved words, starting with the kanji for Keizenshu no Jutsu. The burning wind technique. Temari looked at Naruto. There are only 3 fans like this in all of Hidden Sand, and they never make more. There are over 40 wind users who are Junin level and only 3 of them know the jutsu I just read over. I've spent 9 years training with my battle fan, 300 swings a day, and learned a few low and mid-level skills. In the first week I spend with you, I find what's probably among the most powerful wind jutsus in existence. After saying it, Temari wasn't sure what she thought of this new revelation. Naruto, however, just shrugged. So, my strength has at least doubled in the couple months it's been since I left Konoha. It's to be expected of missing nins. Seeing Temari's curiosity, he elaborated. The idea of a hidden village is that it teaches a certain set of skills, which it keeps secret. For example, mist jutsus aren't taught in Hidden Leaf and fire jutsus are rarely taught in Hidden Mist. This means that people are very limited in what they learn. Nukanons, on the other hand, have no such restrictions. He continued on, checking the food as he did so. The sword I use is a mist sword. No one in Leaf uses such weapons, but I do because it suits me. I know that you love your fan, but I can and intend to teach you every jutsu I know. It's a sharing of resources, and it's what makes missing nins so strong. Temari nodded. Though the idea of learning foreign jutsus sounded odd to her, it made a lot of sense. Seeing the food was cooked, Naruto took it off the fire and sat down next to Temari's fan. His own words had given him an idea. How long, he asked, will it take you to learn that fire jutsu written on your fan? Temari thought for a moment, assuming we spend most of each day traveling, about a week to be good enough to use it, but completely mastering a jutsu like this takes years. Naruto started digging through scroll pouches on his vest. He finally found what he was looking for and passed it to her. It was the scroll of basic stealth jutsus from Hidden Mist the old barber had given him. I want you, he said, to learn the first jutsu in that scroll, Mizu Gyushoku no Jutsu, water condensation technique. It's a basic jutsu used to help people learn Kirigako no Jutsu. It supersaturates the air around you with water, like on a very humid day. And why? Temari asked, am I doing this? Naruto started to eat and spoke between bites. I have an idea, but I won't say anything else until I see this burning winds technique of yours. More importantly, if we move at a steady pace, I expect the next hunter squad to catch up to us in just under 2 weeks. I want to be ready for them when they appear. Naruto took a bite of rice and chewed for a minute. They won't make the same mistakes as last time, they'll be far better prepared, and there'll probably be more of them. All this means that not only will I need your help this time, we need to plan in advance. Temari set down her fan and grabbed some food for herself, and the two spent the evening talking. By the time Temari slid her fan into her sleeping bag and crawled in next to it, her mind was a whirlwind of activity. She had just decided to help ambush a group of Leaf Nin, allies of her country. Her status as a Nukanon would be unquestionable after this. Somehow, that thought didn't bother her nearly so much as it should have. As the Leaf army set up camp for the night, Tsunade sent a messenger to Iruka. She had finally arranged for the transfer of everyone he needed. She had temporarily transferred 7 shinobi to the Hunter Nin and their first group briefing was to start in 10 minutes. When said time arrived, Iruka strode into a tent of mostly confused-looking faces. Iruka quickly took control. Everyone, shut up, he called, silencing the group. As some of you know, he continued, you are here because you have been temporarily put under my command for a very important mission. That is to find and incapacitate Uzumaki Naruto by any means necessary. Aruka saw a couple people gasp slightly and went on, I want each of you to tell me, now, why you've been selected for this team. You need to understand that before anything else, go from right to left. The person on Aruka's far right stood. I am here, Morino Abiki said, because I am the best personality analyzer in Konoha. My purpose is to study the target's movements and figure out what he'll do next. Aruka had done some digging and discovered that Abiki had played a similar role in the hunt for Uchiha Itachi. Abiki sat and the second person stood. I am here, said Hyuga Neji, to act as a scout for the squad. Aruka was pleased with that answer. He had been afraid the Hyuga might start into a speech about destiny. The third member stood, as troublesome as it is, I am here to strategize, and because I'm the only one to see Naruto's powers of manifestation. Shikamaru added a grumble for added effect. Number 4 stood, I guess I'm here because I'm somewhat experienced with the habits of S-class criminals. Anko smirked as she finished. The fifth member just looked lost, so Aruka stepped in. Tenten is here, he said, because she has by far the most experience with weapons, and as of now, we know nothing about the sword Naruto carries or how to counter it. The sixth member stood and casually put his book away. I guess I'm here because Naruto was on my team, so I know him pretty well, and of course, because I'm a Junin. All the Genin and Chunin glared. Kakashi just smiled under his mask. The seventh member stood looking only slightly nervous. Tsunade-sama has sent me to act as the squad's medic and her representative. Shizune quickly sat back down. Aruka surveyed his team. He hadn't asked for Shizune, but knew she would be a good addition. First thing, Aruka looked pointedly at Kakashi, I don't care what your rank is, you're under my command until the Hokage says otherwise. He got a round of nods. Good. Now on to the briefing. Aruka had decided to start off with a demonstration, so he took the photos of Gaara and Sasuke the Hokage had transferred to clear plastic and overlapped them. We are looking, he said as he held the overlaid pictures up to the light, for someone of almost exactly this hair color. Abiki nodded slowly, but the rest had wide eyes. Aruka set the pictures down and turned to his team. Right now, Naruto is changing, and so he looks to what he admires to see how he should change. It's a period all missing nin go through, redefining their idini, but it doesn't last forever. If we are ever going to catch him, we need to do it now, while he is relatively predictable. Aruka started to pace as he talked, but there are complications, not the least of which is Temari of the Sand. Initially, she was his prisoner, but we have a report stating she killed one of the hunter nin last sent after them, so we have no idea what to expect from her. As time passed, Aruka called various team members up to explain certain things. Abiki gave a speech on the possibility that Naruto was using the acculation of fear stimulus, which most of the team members had never heard of before. Tenten was asked to talk about the various methods Naruto could be using to control his swords, and Anko talked about making sure they didn't allow themselves to go easy on him because he had once been their friend. She calmly explained that they would have enough problems beating him going all out, never mind if one of them got cold feet. At the end of 4 long hours, Aruka let them go off to bed, as they were leaving for Konoha early the next morning. Most left feeling they had accomplished a great deal, but they all knew they were short on information. All they could do now was speculate based on the words of a single hunter nin. Once the tent was cleared, Aruka sat alone and rubbed his head. He couldn't believe he was doing this, but also knew it needed to be done. This was the best shot they would ever have. They knew approximately where the boy was, and what he was doing. More importantly, they had an idea of who he was. A year from now, Naruto could be a completely different person. Aruka knew he was the only one who could do this. Not even Kakashi understood Uzumaki Naruto the way he did. He couldn't allow himself to fail. Gaara, Kankuro, and Baki sat in their tent, facing each other somberly. Kankuro smirked at his Junin teacher, Go Fish. Baki cursed silently, he had been sure Kankuro had a 2. He drew the 4 of clubs and re-examined his hand. It wasn't looking good. Baki decided to gamble. Gaara, do you have any 4s? The red-haired boy glared as he handed his 4 of diamonds over. The 3 were now relaxing with a game of Go Fish, after hours of dastardly plotting. They knew the worst they could do was slow the hunt, but they intended to do that as much as possible. The first act had already been done, as Gaara had used his sand to steal all the hunter nin masks in camp and had hidden them in a bag. He then found a hornet's nest in a tree in the forest and used the bag to block it. Whoever removed the bag would get a rather unwelcome surprise. Naruto woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose. They were only 3 hours from a small city, and he decided they would spend the day there. He figured that the two of them needed some time to enjoy themselves. They had made excellent time over the last couple days and were ahead of schedule, and Naruto also didn't want to get too far ahead of the hunters. That may have sounded odd, but his plan required that he know when the hunter nins were coming, and if they initially escaped and the hunters couldn't find them, who knew when the masked shinobi would find them again. Naruto started to pack up camp just as Temari was waking up. As had become their custom, Naruto turned his back as she got out of her sleeping bag, and after 15 seconds or so, went back to whatever he had been doing. The two were soon running and arrived at the edge of the city at around 11 o'clock. The first order of business was, as always, to find a place to stay. Temari suggested a tall hotel so they could practice on the roof without being seen from the ground. Naruto agreed and soon they had a room. They both quickly retreated to the roof where Temari was practicing Mizu Gyushoku no Jutsu while Naruto counted their money. They were still well off, but the money would run out just before or as they arrived at Hidden Cloud, so they would have to find work quickly. Meanwhile, Temari was having some problems with her practicing. She managed to gather water into the air around her, but it took a long time. She clocked herself at about 30 seconds to complete the jutsu. The other problem was that her cloths were soaked through, and she would swear Kirit was leering at her. She would be just starting the jutsu, and she would have this incredibly creepy feeling run down her spine, but when she turned, the sword was just sitting there on the roof next to Naruto, same as always. Inside the sword, Kyuubi was grinning to himself. He had noticed that he had become more easily amused after 14 years of imprisonment, but didn't really mind. Every time Temari turned her back, the demon would manifest just a little bit of his head, enough to stare at her until she started to turn and the demon dropped the manifestation. This went on for 20 minutes or so until Naruto noticed, immediately telling the fox to give it a rest, as Temari was starting to look mentally unstable. Finished with his monetary evaluation, Naruto stood and stretched. "You up for a taijutsu spar?" the boy asked the still irate Sand Nin. Temari nodded abruptly and brought her fan into the ready position. Naruto looked at it nervously. "You do realize," he said, "that taijutsu means no wind blasts. I seriously doubt the hotel would appreciate a hole in its roof." Temari didn't even bother to respond, she just ran, swinging low, trying to take Naruto's legs out from under him. Naruto decided to experiment. He blocked the fan with his sword and sent an image to Kyuubi. Temari expected her attack to be blocked, but didn't expect the counterattack to come in the form of a manifested glowing claw. She flung herself backwards, just dogging the demon's swipe. The spar continued mostly like that. The sand girl found herself often able to block Kirit if she saw it coming, but the demon and Naruto were working together in synchronization. Kyuubi could manifest from anywhere on the sword at any time, making him completely unpredictable. The final experiment came when Naruto threw his blade, which Temari just managed to dodge, only to find herself flying through the air. Since letting go meant dropping her, Kyuubi just flew around in a full circle, releasing Temari so she fell into Naruto, causing both nins to go sprawling. They tried to untangle themselves while Kirit embedded itself in the roof, oozing self-satisfaction. Both deciding that was enough sparing for the day, and as it was around noon, the two went back to their room and started to think about lunch. To Temari's mild shock, Naruto changed into one of his t-shirts, and even more odd was that he left his sword in the room and told her to do the same with her fan. "I really don't like the idea of walking around unarmed. I just got the fan a couple days ago and am still getting used to it." Naruto waved off her concerns. "Kirit will watch the room and make sure nothing happens to your fan. He said with a grin, are going out." At this point, Temari demonstrated the art of appearing embarrassed and angry at the same time. It's a subtle combination of a light blush and narrowed eyes. Naruto figured she was about to ask why, so he just grabbed her hand and walked out of the room. 3 minutes later, the two were walking down the street, Temari's complaints and questions forgotten. "So, where are we going, exactly?" she asked curiously. "It's a surprise. I don't like surprises, tell me." Naruto stopped walking and turned to examine her for a moment. Without warning, he closed the distance between them. Naruto shrugged. We won't need to be shinobi today, so there's no need to advertise that we are shinobi. Temari continued to glare. Next time, tell me. I'll do it. Naruto shrugged again. Okay, but he was still grinning. Temari didn't realize she had forgotten to ask where they were going until they arrived. Back in their hotel room, the maid was vacuuming the floor when she suddenly jumped and screamed. There was no one in the room, but she would swear someone had just pinched her. Elsewhere, the Konoha camp was chaos. No less than 7 incidents had occurred since this morning, and Tsunade was starting to get significantly annoyed. It had all started when 2 hunter nin had come to her reporting that their masks were missing. It was soon noticed that all the masks were missing. The Hokage was sure all these events had something to do with the 3 all too innocent-looking sand shinobi in front of her, but had no proof. Gaara, Kankuro and Baki stood there smiling warmly, showing no trace of malice. Tsunade had called the 3 here to discuss Baki's request for the squad to remain in Konoha to monitor events concerning Temari. She knew the 3 were just going to disrupt the hunt, but couldn't say that for political reasons. She was about to make up a reason to deny Baki's request when she noticed water on the ground and a Chunin burst into the room. Hokage-sama, you won't believe this. Come look outside. Sensing the urgency, Tsunade rushed out of the tent and gasped. The whole camp was covered in 8 inches of water, which was very quickly turning the field into a swamp. The 3 sand nins were no less surprised than the Hokage at his sight before them. This hadn't been one of their many plots, not of them had the power to do this. Anbu suddenly dropped around them. The leader quickly kneeled in the mud and gave his report. It's some type of unknown water jutsu that brings water from underground rivers and springs to the surface. We sensed a large chakra signature, but when we arrived at its location the jutsu was done and there was no trace of the user. We did, however, find this. The Anbu commander handed Tsunade a sealed note, which she opened. Dear Hokage, just a note to inform you that your security is a little lax. I've been here for 5 hours and no one's noticed me. I was hoping for a decent fight, but in lieu of that, I've left you a present to remind you to be more observant. I hope your robes and scrolls kept her in a water-resistant bag. Itachi. In the margin was a drawing of a cloaked figure giving peace sign. Tsunade swore and crumpled the note in her hand. She looked out at the mess that had been an organized military camp only hours earlier. It might be 1 or 2 days before the main force could move out again. They'd have to find the nearest river and camp there, as almost everything would need to be washed. One man had just set an army back 2 to 3 days. Tsunade sighed. I know it's hopeless, but search the area just in case Itachi decided to hang around. Other than that, everyone salvage what they can from the mud. Deciding that her declaration applied to them too, the 3 Sans snuck out the other way. Gaara made a note to find and learn that water jutsu. Temari walked excitedly through the street fair, looking at everything. Open shops and stands really didn't work in hidden sand, as windstorms were too violent. Naruto just followed her slowly, as she rushed from one stall to the next, oblivious to the afternoon's heat. Naruto had always enjoyed places like this, but had only ever worked up the nerve to go to a festival in Konoha once. It had been the best night of his life until someone had recognized him and a small riot started. Thankfully, there was no riot this time, just an overenthusiastic girl. Temari stopped for a moment to stare covetously at the merchandise of an old lady selling intricate fans. They were of normal size, but beautiful all the same. Her attention was soon diverted, however, when she saw a stand selling mini donuts. Realizing she had no money, she looked for Naruto. Said boy was walking down the center of the walkway when Temari rushed up to him. I need money for mini donuts. Why? Because I've never had mini donuts before. Temari said, as if it were obvious. Naruto sighed and handed over his wallet. You can spend 3,000 yen, no more. Temari dashed off to buy snacks while Naruto left the money in his pocket. The old lady's fans sold for 4,000 yen. He had 4,300 yen. It was a lot of money. He remembered the way her face had lit up when he had given her the master-level battle fan in the forest. Money wasn't that important after all. Temari was practically bouncing as the two left the street fair. It was very unlike her to be this hyper, but she was slightly tipsy and on a sugar high, induced by 4 bags of mini donuts and too many free samples of sake. Naruto was following her at a distance looking slightly exasperated. About the only thing he had done in the last 2 hours was give Temari the fan he had bought her. She loved it, and that alone made it worth the money, but Naruto was wishing he'd given it to her later. See, Temari had quickly discerned that there was no reason she couldn't use wind jutsus with a smaller fan, combine that with her temper, her being only slightly drunk, and a sugar high, and what you got was a rather dangerous girl. She had already threatened a stall keeper who she claimed had cheated her, when in fact she had missed the target she had been aiming at. The man hadn't known why the strange young woman was waving her fan at him, and Naruto intervened before a small windstorm disrupted the fair. It was then decided that it was time to go back. So now, the two were walking back to their hotel, except that random things in the vicinity regularly distracted Temari. It wasn't that she wasn't moving, she was just moving very slowly. Finally, Naruto settled for the same method he had used to get her to leave the room in the first place. He just took hold of her hand and started off at a high pace. Eventually, Temari started to calm down, and a few blocks from the hotel she pulled her hand from Naruto's. When they arrived, Naruto said he wanted to go for a run, so Temari went back to the room alone and flopped down onto her bed, covering her head with her hands. She was confused. Her entire life had really been a very simple process. She had gone to the academy, become a shinobi, and the theoretical continuation of her life should have included a perfect mission record until she was a Junin and a lifetime of service to her village. In her entire life, she had really only ever had to deal with 4 males on a regular basis. Her father, who was an ass, who Temari ignored, Baki, whose 2 passions in life were being melodramatic and playing Go Fish, who Temari was indifferent to, Gaara, who had been insane most of her life, and who she had been mostly afraid of, and Kankuro, whose main hobby was pissing her off, who she beat on. She now found herself in a situation where she had a new person to deal with and a new life to plan for. For all her efforts, Naruto was an enigma to her. He wasn't anything like anyone she had ever met before. At first, she had been afraid of him, but that fear was vanishing faster every day. The more she thought about it, the more human he became. Naruto had never hurt her in any way, quite the contrary in fact. He had been nothing but kind and generous. It was, she justified, his fault she was in this position in the first place, but she doubted most kidnappers were as nice as he was. But for all that, she had never yet managed to shake the memory of how she had first seen him on the field of battle, his eyes burning with a dark inner fire as she found herself frozen in terror. But equally impossible was it to forget how just this afternoon he had been so sweet. Never once complaining, always complimenting her when she won a game, and picking out that fan for her. Temari rubbed her temples. All this thinking was giving her a headache. Baki sat with his face firm, his eyes unwavering as he stared across the table at his opponent. Gaara stared back, undaunted, his whole body perfectly still. Kankuro, the moderator, sat between them, a deck of cards sitting unopened in his hand. Championship matches were always held with a fresh deck. It was also tradition that each player had to bet something of personal value. Baki took out a katana passed down in his family for 3 generations and set it down. Not willing to be outdone, Gaara set his special edition of Ica Ica Paradise, the motion picture, down on the table. Baki's eyes widened. The stakes were high indeed. Kankuro carefully unwrapped the cards, shuffled them, and slowly started to deal. The tension built until both players had their hands ready and Kankuro placed the deck in the middle of the table. The puppet master raised his hand and brought it down dramatically. Go. Fish. Naruto ran. He found himself reminiscing, as his afternoon with Temari had reminded him of times long past. Of another afternoon he had spent with another person who could smile so brightly, despite the hardship they were dealing with. He wondered idly what it was that gave Haku and Temari the ability to do that. As always, he was soon lost deep in the depths of his mind. As Zabuza stood immobile, Kakashi had started to lecture about how Zabuza's ambitions were too dangerous, and how no shinobi should act that way. Zabuza laughed. I don't give a damn, I fight for my ideals, and that shall continue. It was a statement made by someone who in his heart knew he had lost, but the demon of the mist had never given up. For the first time in months, tears started to run down Naruto's face as he ran through the city. He could remember it as if he was still there, Zabuza already half-D, taking on a horde with nothing. The boy continued to let these dark memories roll over him, when he suddenly stopped. Naruto had been running for many minutes and was atop a bridge, looking down at a flowing river. He suddenly pulled out his forehead protector, examining it. Everything about it was the same as when he had modified it months before, the kanji for demonic mirage, staring back at him. It was then that he realized he'd made an error in judgment. He had been worrying ever since he left Konoha about whether he would be able to live up to Zabuza's legacy, whether he was worthy of holding the demon sword. He realized as he stood atop that bridge that he had been foolish in thinking either of those things were what had made Zabuza great. It didn't matter how strong he was, as long as he was strong enough to protect his ideals and what was precious to him. Both Zabuza and Haku had tried to live like that, and had both died without regret in trying. Naruto released his forehead protector and watched as it fell and landed with a tiny splash in the water. Kakashi had said that fighting only for your ideals and those precious to you was no way to be a ninja. If that were true, Naruto didn't want to be one. He slowly turned and walked back towards the hotel, feeling refreshed. He had Sere Kirit, and Temari's smile. He had strength, and a precious person to protect. Baki fought to maintain his composure as he felt hundreds of eyes on him. Shortly after the start of the game, the Hokage had interrupted, and as any form of gambling immediately entranced Tsunade, everyone who was looking for the Hokage had come to their tent. Soon, the tent had been disassembled around their ears as more people wanted to watch, but the game had never paused. Both players were cautious. The game was more than half over, with Gaara showing a one-pair lead. More people gathered, and some were standing on chairs to see over the throng. Somewhere in the crowd, a Chunin had set up some huge speakers and was playing Eye of the Tiger. Baki made a daring move. Gaara, do you have any fives? The crowd collectively held their breath, until Gaara slowly pulled a card from his hand and passed it over. Everyone burst into cheers and claps, waiting anxiously for Gaara to make his move. Elsewhere in camp, Iruka was fretting. There were too many delays. His squad would have to start the hunt now, without returning to Konoha first. This was very unusual, but time was of the essence. Iruka had taken the initiative and ordered a group meeting without consulting Tsunade. He had ordered his team to get ready to leave in 4 hours. Now came the problem. Iruka would have to explain to the Hokage exactly why it was he was breaking regulation and going behind her back. But he would make her understand. He had to. This was their only chance. As Iruka planned his departure, Naruto was just arriving back to the hotel. The first thing Temari noticed from her prone position was that he seemed more invigorated than he had when he'd left. His eyes had just a bit more fire behind them. He grinned. I hope you're enjoying your break. Tomorrow, we leave the city and train. Temari looked skeptical. Train? Shouldn't we be putting more distance between our pursuers and us? Naruto shook his head. Running is mostly pointless. They will find us eventually, and so we'll travel only a few hours a day and devote ourselves to training. With that, Naruto walked over to his bed and flopped on it. The two lay there, unmoving, basking in the fact that, at least for now, they could relax. Far away, Baki stood among a cheering crowd, holding Gaara's special edition tape above him proudly. -8 days later, Hyuga Neji ran through the forest. They had been traveling constantly since the departure from the Konoha camp, and it was suspected that they would soon find their prey. He knew the others were somewhere nearby, but it was his job to initiate contact. After that, he was just supposed to fight as hard and as long as possible. He only accepted his task because he trusted in his team to uphold their part in the plan. Neji understood the role he was to play, but that didn't mean he liked it. Temari stood behind Naruto in the forest, her hands guiding his through unfamiliar motions. She was finding it interesting how something that felt so natural to her could be so alien to someone else. She was also finding it mildly awing how fast Naruto was able to learn jutsus. He was slightly clumsy, but held the huge fan confidently. It had taken her 3 months to learn the basic kamaitake, it took him only 7 days. Temari was feeling weak. On the other hand, she was infinitely stronger than when she had been Kei. Her progress with Kei's Nenshu no Jutsu had been swift, and she was now able to make the slicing winds hot, if not scorching. She had also, at Naruto's request, continued to practice Mizu Gyushoku no Jutsu, and had become adept at that as well. Naruto hesitated in his motion and Temari snapped back to reality. His hands had slipped, so she replaced his hands in the correct places and took a step back. Try it again. He nodded and again started the motions. Temari had explained that it simply wasn't possible to try to use a fan in combat without knowing at least a little of the taijutsu that went along with the huge weapons. The Sannin looked over at Kyuubi's practice, and was, as always, impressed. Kirit was stuck in the ground, surrounded by trees. The demon was trying to manifest and destroy the trees farther and farther away, using the least amount of chakra possible. Kyuubi had been practicing with Naruto or by himself almost constantly, because if there was one thing the demon hated, it was weakness. As amazing as it was watching huge glowing red appendages tear apart a forest, the boy and demon together were even more astounding. The two had been practicing synchronizing their thoughts and perceptions, and now both could see into a bit of each other's minds. All these thoughts passed through Temari's mind as she came to her arc nemesis, the water balloon. This had been her assigned practice for the afternoon. She had been nervous when Naruto had grinned so much while explaining what she would be trying to do, and now she understood why. The thing just wouldn't break. She could spin the water with her chakra, but never managed to get anything close to the pulsating and exploding that Naruto had achieved with so little apparent effort. It was pissing her off, to say the least. Naruto let out a yell as he finally got the motions right, not slipping or hesitating once. He looked at Temari to find her glaring heatedly at the small water-filled object in her hand. He knew she didn't have the chakra capacity yet for a full-fledged Rasengan, but intended for her to at least start practicing. He had been serious when he had said he was going to teach her everything he knew. Naruto glanced at the sky. Temari, supper sounds good right now, you done practicing? Temari threw the balloon violently against a tree as Naruto retrieved his sword. He took that as a yes. He passed her fan back to her and they walked the short distance back to camp. So what is it today? The boy asked. Dehydrated rice or dehydrated rice? Hard choice, Temari muttered. Naruto just grabbed a pot and started the 5-minute walk to the river, humming to himself. When he arrived, someone was watching him. Naruto turned to the left, and found a pair of white eyes looking upon him with hatred. He slowly removed his hand from Kirit's handle. Yo, Neji. I was wondering when someone would show up. The Hyuga's glare became even darker. I was told not to confront you if we met, but I don't need a team to beat S like you. Byakugan. The veins burst out around Neji's eyes as Naruto responded with a smile. That's a little arrogant, isn't it? But I'll tell you what, since you're going to be so brave, I won't even remove the sword from my back. That should make it at least amusing. Neji practically boiled with rage as he charged. Naruto noticed that Neji had become much faster, and Naruto was starting to get mildly concerned, as Neji wasn't using his gentle fist, just ordinary punches. Leaping back, Naruto opted for his usual, and created a small army of shadow clones and ordered them to attack. The fight that followed really wasn't anything new. Neji fought methodically, slowly reducing the number of clones until a Kaiten removed the last 5. He had to admit, Neji had gotten much better, but Naruto really didn't have time to play with the Hyuga. The two closed again and now Naruto could feel the telltale chakra surrounding Neji's hands. They were playing for keeps this time. Neji glared yet again, only slightly out of breath, and fell into a stance Naruto remembered all too well. Do you have any last words? Knowing Neji had the honor to wait while he decided what to say, Naruto had an idea. Sent an image to the fox. Can we pull this off? Naruto mentally asked. Yep, the fox replied, and Naruto could feel the demon's grin. Without Neji, I suppose. The fox's grin grew wider. Back in the real world, Naruto felt his perception extend as he and Kyuubi synced their thoughts. He looked up at Neji. I have words to say, and I want you to never forget them. The Hyuga nodded slightly, but his eyes widened as Naruto fell into a stance that mirrored his own. The fox boy smirked. It's over, you are within the field of my hack. Neji's only response was to attack, gentle fist style, hands of hack. 2 hands. Neji called. 4 hands. Naruto called simultaneously. If Neji was shocked when Naruto called out at the same time he did, he was even more shocked when Naruto successfully blocked 2 strikes and landed 2 of his own. Neji knew it was impossible for any non-Hyuga to use the hands of hack, and yet Naruto was doing it, and starting with 4. Despite all this, Neji refused to be intimidated. Naruto wouldn't be able to keep up with his speed forever. 4, 8, 8, 16. Again, Neji was thwarted. 16, 32. Neji was slightly worried, this shouldn't be possible. 32, 64. His body was in agony as Naruto blocked all 32 of his strikes and landed 32 of his own. 64, 128. He had won. Naruto's strikes had always missed slightly, Neji had sunburned tenketsu, but none were completely closed. Naruto was doing the impossible, imitating a Hyuga skill of the highest level, but there was no way to block his next attack. 128 was as many strikes as the greatest of Hyuga could manage. 120A, Neji stopped. Halfway through his final strike, two wickedly clawed red arms manifested from the sword on Naruto's back. Hack. Demon Claw. 256 hands. Neji tried to block, but it was impossible. All four arms were striking with godlike speed, and where Naruto missed the tenketsu, the demonic arms had perfect aim. Naruto snorted as the Kyuubi dissipated his arms. The Hyuga really was stupid. The greatest attack they had required that their enemies be slower than them, in one place, and limited to 2 arms. Beyond that, when all was said and done, the hands of Hack were rarely lethal. Then again, he thought, on the positive side, he had gotten his first field test of his and Kyuubi's mind sync. He had been impressed when, in practice sessions, Kyuubi's perception had shown the ability to give a blurry image of the chakra systems of nearby people. Naruto sighed, picked up his pot, and headed back to camp. Unfortunately, they didn't have time for supper anymore. As soon as he set foot in camp, he had an idea of what had happened. Temari was nowhere to be seen. Her fan was lying near the fire. She would never have left without it. Sitting on the ground was his magnetic chess set, only 3 pieces on the board. A black king and black queen were being pincered by a white knight. It was a position where the knight could take either the king or queen on his next turn. The only way for the black king to survive is to s the black queen to his opponent. The whole thing with Neji had been a setup. The bastards had taken Temari. Naruto growled and gripped Sere Kirit's handle. They had gone too far this time. He was done with holding back. Naruto paced restlessly around camp, cursing his own stupidity. It seemed so obvious in retrospect. The leaf didn't dare attack him head-on. Naruto was now sure that the hunters didn't know what his relationship with Temari was, and so they couldn't risk that she was still just his prisoner. So the only thing they could do was take her and interrogate her. Naruto resisted the powerful urge to destroy something. He needed to be calm, his opponents were smart, and so he had to be too. Taking a deep breath, Naruto analyzed the situation. From his enemy's perspective, taking Temari served many purposes. Finding out whether she was a voluntary Nukenin, or whether Naruto had forced her. Finding out about Naruto's tactics and skills, picking apart what she knew about his mind. The problem was, Naruto didn't know how Temari would answer. Would she betray him to the leaf? Would she resist and risk her life? Would she just sit silently and not respond? He cursed and punched a tree. Worst of all was that he knew the final and most obvious reason for kidnapping Temari was that it would drive Naruto crazy, wondering whether the girl was D, and unfortunately, it was working. He forced himself to be calm. Temari could take care of herself, and fighting while mad was the worst thing a person could do. Now focused, he started examining the campsite more closely. He could determine many things about the hunter squad just from looking at their work. There was no sign of a struggle, so Temari had been surprised. Naruto could personally attest to the fact that this was no small feat, so there was at least one Junin on the team. The positioning of the chess pieces was a brilliant psychological taunt, so he was facing someone who either was very smart or knowledgeable about the workings of the human mind. Considering Neji's presence, Naruto was betting that the chess was the work of Shikamaru. They were hoping to weaken his resolve by forcing him to fight his ex-friends. 2 hours ago, it might have worked. They wouldn't be able to transport her very far, they knew that they were giving Naruto a major chance to escape either way, and wouldn't let themselves be more than an hour from his position. If he moved fast, he should be able to find them within 5 hours using a crisscross pattern. Wasting no more time, he dashed off into the forest, heading back to where he had last seen Neji. If he centered his search there, he might get lucky and find the hunters within the hour. Aruka and Shizune ran through the forest, Shizune carrying Neji in her arms. She had been horrified after only a brief examination and immediately declared that he needed to get to a real hospital, as she didn't have the resources to treat him in the forest. Since Iruka was the only one who wasn't needed immediately as part of the plan, he was her escort and guard. Shizune would run with Neji if Naruto found them, leaving Iruka to cover their escape. Iruka understood better than anyone that his team was the best for the job, but he still worried as he pushed himself, trying to move as fast as humanly possible. He had left Ibiki in charge, but still wished he could be there himself. He was out of his thoughts as Neji M, and he turned to see the Hyuga starting to shift in Shizune's arms. Iruka cursed and started to run faster. He wasn't going to let anyone die. Temari slowly awoke, but trying to think was like swimming through mud. She tried to move, and upon finding she couldn't, sighed silently. She was really getting tired of waking up groggy and immobile. She kept her eyes closed and stayed perfectly still, not wanting to alert anyone as to her wakefulness. Without much hope, she shifted her weight slightly and was surprised when she felt all her hidden kunai exactly where they were supposed to be. Whoever had taken all her obvious weaponry hadn't bothered to search her. As an experiment, she shifted again and felt a lump. Temari had tucked the small fan Naruto had given at the fair into her sash for safekeeping. It was still there. Not wasting time searching her for concealed weapons was understandable if there were time constraints, but the small wood fan in her sash was obvious, and anyone who didn't bother to take a fan from a wind user, even a tied-up wind user, would have to be either the most powerful or laziest shinobi in existence. A short distance away, an oblivious Shikamaru sat staring at clouds. He had taken the least troublesome job, as everyone else was out patrolling the forest. His mind, happily distracted by floating white puffs, paid very little attention to his, supposedly, unconscious prisoner. Behind him, Temari carefully opened her eyes. She immediately recognized Shikamaru, which answered the question of who had tied her up and failed to search her, but didn't tell her what to do next. The shadow user was leaning up against a tree, facing away from her and staring at the sky. Temari could feel her hidden kunai in her right sleeve. If she could reach it, see herself would be simple. The only obstacle was Shikamaru. Temari knew she would have to be very careful and quiet, because if the pineapple-haired boy noticed she was awake and caught wind of her plan, she would be sunk. She started to move, agonizingly slowly, shifting her body so the hidden kunai would slide out of its hiding place. She knew it might take a while at this speed, but impatience could ruin her only chance of escape. Ibiki and Anko stood uneasily in the forest. Both knew that everything was going according to plan, but neither could shake the nervousness that came with waiting. Provoking an enraged demon boy to attack you seemed like a much better idea around a planning table surrounded by your teammates. Iruka had said flatly that despite how much the boy may have changed, there was no way Naruto would abandon someone he had decided was his responsibility. The plan had developed logically from there: kidnap Temari when the two Nukanons were apart, then allow Naruto to come to them. Kakashi had been the one to capture Temari, and everything had seemed perfect until Shizune had arrived at the rendezvous point with Neji's B-body. They had all assumed Neji would at least be able to hold his own against Naruto for a few minutes. They had been wrong. Now they were short 3 members, leaving only one to guard Temari and 4 people split into 2-man teams on the lookout for the Fox Boy. Neji had been Chunin level, and he had been completely and utterly crushed. That left even the Junin slightly disturbed. It was for this reason, that as they watched the silent forest, Ibiki had lost his usual aura of casualness and Anko was completely serious. Tension was thick in the air as they stood back to back in the forest. Neither could put a finger on exactly what it was that was bothering them, but the disturbance was there nonetheless. It was then that the mist started to form. The Leaf Nin resisted the immediate urge to set off their signal flares. They didn't want to call Kakashi and Tenten to back him up unless they were sure the mist wasn't a diversion. Within the fog, Naruto stood calmly holding Sere Kirit. Ibiki and Anko couldn't see him, but he could see them. He was one with his sword and one with his surroundings. It wasn't a feeling that could be described to someone who hadn't felt it, as he couldn't see things around him, but he knew they were there all the same. He knew the position of every tree, rock and plant for 20 feet in every direction. He felt rather than saw the agitated movements of the 2 Junin in front of him, but it really didn't matter. He knew where they were, and they had no idea where he was. His eyes narrowed and shone with a dark inner light. Both Junin easily dogged Naruto's initial strike, as their instincts had been honed from 100 battles, but the boy went straight into high gear. He knew that both Leaf Nins had much larger ninjutsu collections than his own, and so he would have to pressure them so much they had no time for jutsus. Kyuubi's 8 Seirei clones were already in the air, and Naruto had directed the demon to focus on Ibiki, leaving Naruto himself to deal with Anko. Said female Leaf Nin was currently pulling off her best acrobatics in an effort to dodge Seirei and the dark boy who wielded it like it weighed no more than a kunai. Anko had known the boy would be strong, but her current situation was ridiculous. She suddenly saw an opening in Naruto's defense and went for it. Naruto jumped, taking his sword into an upward slash. Knowing it was too late to reverse her momentum, Anko brought her 2 kunai down to block, and they held for a second, but were no match for the demonic blade. Ibiki just stood there, grinning at him. Naruto's eyes widened as Ibiki continued to grin as he collapsed. The fox boy growled, baring his fangs as he ran to pick up his bag and Temari's battle fan before continuing towards where he figured the Leaf camp would be. Unfortunately, the explosion had completely awoken Shikamaru from his oblivion, and he was now standing alertly above as Temari faked sleep. Shikamaru crumpled to the ground and Temari jumped to her feet. Oddly enough, in all her plans to escape, it had never occurred to her that she was now willingly acting like a missing nin. Not willing to waste time contemplating this fact, as the flare probably meant trouble for Naruto, Temari started to run in the direction of where the flare had gone off. The ex-sand nin hadn't gotten very far when she felt 2 presences right behind her. Just as she was pondering how to get away, Temari found herself facing 1 normal eye and 1 Sharingan, and knew she was in rather deep trouble. Kakashi glared, "Why are you trying to escape?" Temari just smiled, "Because you captured me, isn't it normal to run away?" "Then why haven't you run away from him?" Kakashi said angrily. Temari's mind was working at warp speed. Despite her outward confidence, she had no hope of winning. She didn't have her fan or any time to prepare a plan of acti. Prepare. Suddenly all of Naruto's annoying comments made sense. Mizu Gyushoku no Jutsu and Kei's Nenshu no Jutsu weren't supposed to be combined, one was a preparation for the other. Willing to gamble, she ignored Kakashi's question and started to run through now familiar seals. As expected, the copy ninja held true to his name and immediately started to imitate her seals. They both finished the seals and called out at the same time, "Mizu Gyushoku no Jutsu." Neither moved as the water started to gather. Within seconds, both were soaked and the air around them was filled with water droplets. Kakashi was perplexed. He had been slightly nervous when Temari had started into hand seals without answering his question, but the jutsu didn't do anything except make you wet. Temari just stood there, hoping beyond hope that Naruto was nearby, if he weren't. It was at that moment that Tenten fell from the trees. Kakashi's Sharingan started to spin as he looked at Tenten. He felt righteous anger building up inside him and subconsciously started the hand seals for Chidori. He probably would have finished them too if Seirei hadn't flown out of the trees, heading straight to Temari. If the huge sword flying towards her unnerved the girl, she didn't show it. A million possibilities went through Kakashi's mind. As the blade was only a few fractions of a second from impact, Temari reached out with her hand and deftly caught her fan as the Seirei clone puffed into non-existence. Using the fan's own momentum to snap it open and spin, Temari forced all the chakra she had into one final jutsu. Kei's Nenshu no Jutsu, Kiki. Burning Wind's technique, Vaporizer. All the water that had collected on her body and in the air turned instantly to steam as the air was lit on fire. Kakashi only managed the Oshi before he was engulfed by a wave of superheated mist and consumed by agony. When the air started to cool and clear up, Kakashi just lay on his back, trying not to move. A shadow suddenly fell over him and he met a set of dark red eyes. "I suppose this is the end for the great copy ninja," Kakashi said without mirth. Naruto shook his head. "No, there's a message I want you to take to Tsunade for me." Kakashi raised his singed eyebrow. "Go ahead, I'm not going anywhere." Naruto thought for a moment and started casually, "As far as I know, your whole team is alive, assuming Ibiki and Anko managed to use healing jutsus, so you can be happy about that. More importantly, I want you to know that if I ever catch even a whiff of the scent of leaf hunters ever again, I'm going to find and kill them while they sleep." Naruto grinned slightly. And if anyone from your village ever lays a hand on one of my precious people ever again. Naruto's eyes suddenly started to glow. Then I will go back to Konoha and burn it to the ground. Naruto's eyes lost the glow and he smiled again. Do we understand each other? Kakashi nodded painfully. Good. Naruto turned to Temari, who had been panting while leaning on her fan. Ready. Temari nodded tiredly. The sun had set, but at that moment she wanted to get far away from the current location as possible. Without further exchange of words, the two Nukenin started to run. Tsunade shot upwards in bed, her body soaked with cold sweat. She had been having a horrible nightmare, but couldn't remember any of what it had been about. She rested a hand on her chest and felt her heart pounding. The fifth was not the type of person to be superstitious, but she would swear for the rest of her life that as she lay there in bed, she somehow knew the team sent after Naruto had been beaten. Feeling a dark sense of dread well up from deep within her, she remembered that she had once read part of a poem that she had thought effectively summed up the life of a shinobi. Theirs not to make reply. Theirs not to reason why. Theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death. Rode the 600. She had only sent 8 people, not 600, but she had sent them on a mission not because the village needed Naruto, but because she as a person cared about him. Only a short distance away, Sabaku no Gaara sat on the ground, watching the moon. He sat cross-legged, staring up into the sky, wondering how Temari was doing. He would be the first to admit that he had never exactly showered his siblings with affection, but Temari's absence had been affecting him deeply. Gaara had been pondering something the Hokage had said to him a few days earlier, that you don't know what you have until it's gone. He was finding that to be disturbingly true. The sand shifted slightly as someone sat down beside him. It took Gaara only a moment to realize it was Kankuro lacking his face paint and body suit. The sand settled and the two sat in silence, the only sound being the wind as it rustled through the trees. Finally, it was Gaara who broke the silence, not sleeping well. No, not really, Kankuro answered, only half paying attention. Seems quiet without her, doesn't it? Kankuro answered again. How do you think she's doing? Okay, I guess, she's with that Naruto kid, and he's tough as nails, said Kankuro. Gaara nodded with a small smile, that he is. And so they sat in silence, each reflecting on their own thoughts. Temari collapsed against a tree in exhaustion sometime around 3 a.m. Naruto had decided they had gone far enough that they weren't likely to be found. He set up the two sleeping bags next to each other. The two really hadn't spoken since their flight from the battlefield, and a great deal was hanging awkwardly between them. Most of the awkwardness was on Temari's side, and she felt the need to talk despite her fatigue. I wanted to, I guess, say thank you. Naruto just looked confused. For what? Temari's nervousness was suddenly replaced with incredulity, for coming to help me escape. Naruto thought for a moment then let out a dark laugh. Don't thank me for that. I went against my village, and don't care if people call me S, but shinobi who leave their comrades behind are worse than S, and even I refuse to sink that low. He suddenly rolled over so they were facing each other, but even beyond that, you are on the very short list of people who are precious to me. Temari tried to cover a blush as Naruto continued, if you ever want to leave, I won't stop you, but until that day, anyone who wants to mess with you has to K me first. Temari just lay there as Naruto rolled back over, and a few minutes later, started to snore. When she did start to drift herself, her mind was still filled with the memory of his final words. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.